It's a rare moment. With the 27-member Europe, France has this presidency only once every 13 years. Every 13 years it has this responsibility to bear the engagement, commitments for Europe while being within the framework of the European collective. It's at the same time a role that will push our priorities, our ambitions, our own agenda, but also to be have the inheritance of a harmony and the European agreement that has to come out. As of January 1st, 2022, we'll have to experience this time at a very special time, and I'll get into that in a minute. This is a health crisis that impacted us for already 2 years. This is also the crisis of the global warming, a growing global inequality, migrations exacerbated by the manipulations of some state, and attempts to destabilize our democracy, and ramping up of tensions because this is in our closest neighborhood. All those things are impacting Europe. Many would like just to rest on the nations. Nations are our strength, our pride, but European unity and their complement is indispensable. This moment requires from us more efficiency, more affirmation, more autonomy, more independence, and among all, to unite we Europeans. This is what we try to translate at the same time in the content of this presidency to come, but also through the symbolic elements that will categorize this presidency. Before getting into the crux of the matter, ask the Secretary of State to European Affairs, who led these works, to show this logo and also the new coin. I commend here the presence of the engraver and of the Monnaie de Paris, which, through its Director General, Mr. Schwartz, worked on this topic for long months and introduced the map of the works through our country. Thank you, Mr. President of the Republic. We will experience a very important time for our country and for the whole European Union. It's, of course, processes, political processes, ambitious that we'll introduce, but it's also symbols, icons, messages that we deliver through very material examples, and I suggest to discover, with much further ado, the emblem we want to show for the presidency of France of the EU. This emblem we have chosen for the next half year, it's the initials of the European Union with the colors of France and stars, the stars of the European Union, with an arrow, a message of ambition, even to see how things will happen, see what is against the renouncement. This emblem, we will defend it under your authority for the past 4 years. For a more sovereign, more democratic Europe, we try to summarize the priorities that you will present in a motto, and that we will see 3 words embodying this European ambition. Recovery, because we are at a time of crisis and we build, and the economic rearmament necessary more than ever. Power, because this is the condition of the European model that we have to preserve and promote around the world. And belonging, because no political project could be sustainable without a collective feeling of participation, taking part in an important adventure, shared values, shared culture for the future. We have wished also, and you commented, Mr. President of the Republic, the General Director and the engraver-in-chief of the French Monnaie de Paris. We wanted a very, very simple symbol, icon. So this will be the new coin. Everybody should have one. Everybody should have one piece of that. Yes, one coin. This coin of €2 is very important because it's the first time since the French and the European have coins in euro that we're changing the engraving of this coin. This is to highlight the anniversary of the single currency. It's the 20 years of the euro. The French and all the Europeans are very attached to the euro, very attached, more than ever. They are supporting the single currency and make of it a stability, attractivity of our economies that protected us during the crisis. On this symbol, engraved by Joachim Jimenez, the master engraver of the Mint of Paris, and it's a modernization, environmental also. The motto of the Republic, which is here, the oak and the olive tree, strength, power, and wiseness. And not only a commemoration, it's going to be a real coin that as of January 1st, 2022, will be circulated. It's minted in Pessac, in the heart of France, in Gironde department. It will be used by each and every one of us as a symbol of Europe. And this Europe, Mr. President, you wanted it to be embodied, also rooted all over France in the territories and overseas. And during this French presidency, this half year of French presidency, in all the French regions, you have seen here 20 cabinet minister meetings in each and every region, the occasion to show this Europe, show this France to all of Europe, value our cultures in the weeks and months to come, and a certain amount of events that you will chair at your level. Europe of symbols, of identity, proximity, this is what we try to embody through those elements. I want to commend, Mr. President, all the teams that all around the government made a tremendous work to prepare this time of responsibility and an important honor for our country. Thank you. Thank you very much for this. Thank you again. Thank you for the Mint of Paris, all the teams who worked, labored for a month. I'd like to commend the Secretary of State, the diplomats, the Cabinet Minister of Foreign Affairs who prepared this presidency, the General Secretary, who prepared it for several months. Also, all of the diplomats at the Quai d'Orsay, our permanent representation in Brussels, and its teams, the Secretary General to the European Affairs, reporting to the Prime Minister, because this task, as you have seen, is really taking a lot of work from the French political personnel and the many diplomats in the Élysée Palace and at the and also the cabinet ministers present here. But it's a cross-ministry work that has kept the government busy for a long month, and it's been taking a long time to prepare this presidency. If I had to summarize in one sentence the target of this presidency from January 1st to June 30, I'd say that we have to move from a Europe of cooperation within our borders to a Europe that would be powerful in the world, fully sovereign, free for its choices, and master of its destiny. That's the target that we have to move to. For the first time, for over half a century, existential issues are raised from a climate, technological point of view, geopolitical point of view, imposing, this is what we've been preparing for several years, to transform deeply our organization, to have a new ambition. I had the occasion to present this agenda in the fall of 2017 at the Sorbonne University, and we completed more of the targets that were laid out. But this work today is made even more indispensable by the background I alluded to. Priorities are the construction of this European sovereignty, this European model. We worked on that in the past weeks with the several member states, with the President of the Council, with whom I was a few minutes ago, President of the Commission, with whom I shared Monday, President of the European Parliament, who was with the Prime Minister, Minister of the Foreign Affairs a few minutes ago, and with the parliamentary groups. I was alongside them in December in Strasbourg for a long time of sharing to prepare this presidency. I'll expose all those priorities in front of the European Parliament on January 19th in Strasbourg. The month of January will be highlighted by a certain amount of sharing with the President of the Council, the Commission and all of the College of the European Commissars in France at the beginning of January, and discussion with the European Parliament 19th of January in Strasbourg. First direction of this presidency is a more sovereign Europe. A more sovereign Europe is, for me, the first aspect, in Europe able to master its borders. In the past weeks, it was proven during the crisis we have seen on the eastern part of Europe, in the eastern border, as by the end of the summer on the Lithuanian and Latvian border, protect our borders is indispensable to ensure the security of the Europeans, to take on the challenge of the migration and avoid the dramas that we experience, the tensions, the hybrid wars we are facing today on the border with Belarus, but also the human drama that are the outcome, direct outcome, through those traffics organized, like what we've experienced in the Channel a few weeks ago, and the drama we all know of. To avoid that the right of asylum that was invented on the European continent, and which is our honor, be led astray, we have to find a Europe who knows how to protect its borders, and that will be on the migration issue a political organization that will enable us to defend our positions. We shall initiate during this presidency a reform of the Schengen space around two priorities. First will be the implementation of a political driving of Schengen. As we did for the Eurozone, we implemented an organization, a political organization, with regular meetings with the finance ministers. We wish to install an organization and a political steering of the Schengen space through regular meetings of the minister in charge of this issue. It is about the credibility of Europe and those who committed themselves in this cooperation, strengthened cooperation of Schengen, to have regular meetings, to take decisions, political decisions, to be able to strengthen the controls at the borders and have a consistent politic of mastering of our borders, external borders. This is the first and foremost condition for the free circulation within the Schengen space. Bearing on the reform, we are ending or finalizing to the works with the European Commission that will give way to legal laws enabling this internal space to work better. Second point is an emergency support system in case of crisis at the borders. When a member state has suddenly to face something that has to strengthen the external borders of our union, like we experienced recently, this state should be able to count upon the support of Frontex, shared agency, whose aim it is, but also the solidarity support in gendarmes and policemen and in equipment. We did it recently, a few weeks ago, when some of our partners called for help, but the reactions are sometimes too slow. Equipments are made in a specific way. We have to create this mechanism of support, cross-governmental. Third point, on the protection of our borders, we wish, under the French presidency, have moved forward what we call the migratory European package, the best organization of our Europe in terms of management of migrations, with a clear will, which is always the same. Work with the countries of origin, countries of transit, to fight against the trafficking and avoid the flows, protect our external borders, harmonize our rules, especially in terms of asylum, support of the refugees and the migrants who are on our territory, and harmonize also of what we call the secondary flows, the circulation of men and women who, once reaching the European ground, have to be better monitored, supported, with easier processes, harmonized at European level, to avoid this no cooperation that we experience between countries for years. This text is essential, and we wish in the half year to come to move it forward beyond the protection of the external borders. The second key element of a more sovereign Europe is obviously to move on our defense policy. As you know, there too, since 2017, we supported the ambition of European defense with a real good breakthrough, a defense European fund, an initiative of the intervention, cooperation, which was structured, and several shared programs. Franco-Germans opened then to other member states in terms of armament, either armaments for our Air Force or the ground forces. About the initiatives taken for the past 4 years, we have to get into a more operational phase, define for ourselves, Europeans, our shared interests and a shared strategy in the world of threats and risks. This presidency will be a time of definition of what we called the strategic compass, a white paper of defense and security that at the same time will present the state of the threats and set our collective choices, our orientations, our ambitions. This strategic compass, was started with the German presidency, and it will be finalized under the French presidency during the European Council in March. We'll have discussions during the December Council and during the summit that we wish to have in France in March on this issue. What is the aim of the strategy? First, to define really a sovereignty, strategic sovereignty, European strategy. This concept that seemed impossible 4 years ago will enable us, Europeans, either member of NATO or not. Some of the member states of the European Union are not member of NATO, and for all those members of NATO, restating their adhesion to this organization, who showed its use and efficiency. But we have shared interests. We have to have a shared analyze of those threats, have new ambitions in terms of defense industry, have also joint exercises, joint partnerships, and define also for the Europeans our organization, shared organization on the new spaces of conflict, i.e. the seas, space, and the cyber. The European Council in March will enable to take act of this compass that took a long work and a lot of work from the several states and several representatives, and have a shared position for the summit in June of NATO in Madrid. It will enable us very concretely to start joint exercises in the strengthening of the European defense industry. Third direction of the sovereign Europe is stability and prosperity of our neighborhood. There's no sovereign Europe if we do not decide as Europeans to have our own strategy, our own agenda regarding our neighbors. Without being exhaustive, I want here quote, 2 geographic spaces that will lead to initiatives of the French presidency. Since the beginning of my mandate, I made of the relation with Africa a priority. And I think indeed deeply that the link, the bond between the two continents on the two sides of the Mediterranean Sea is the major political project and geopolitical project of the decades to come. Relations between Africa and Europe will be structuring from all points of view for the peace around the Mediterranean Sea, but also for peace and prosperity of Europe and of Africa. This is our shared common interest. France launched several initiatives from that point of view. We tried to build for the past 4 years a kind of aggiornamento of the African policy and our strategy, but we must do it as Europeans, building a future for African youth to reduce inequalities, fight against the traffics that are exploiting the poverty and the traffickers who made of the Mediterranean Sea a deadly cemetery, horrendous cemetery. We'll do that in close link with President Michel, President von der Leyen and all the member states, a summit between the African Union and the European Union next February in Brussels, and that will gather the leaders of the countries and of the institutions of the African Union and of the European Union. The aim of this summit is to refound this union, because all through its instruments, it started to get too much red tape, and it went out of wind. We have to recreate a new economic deal with Africa. This is what we prepared in May 18th summit about the financing of the African economies. This summit enabled us to trigger the reallocation of spatial drawing of the International Monetary Fund towards the African states, enabling us to take act of this mechanism during the last G20 in Rome. We Europeans, go to the very end of the solidarity with the Africans, namely, looking at the figures given by the World Bank and the IMF. Between 2020 and 2025, 300 billion euros of financing needed for the African economy, because this has a financial and economic outcome of the COVID-19 to manage with, and a real demographic explosion. So Europe has, in the international bodies, have a shared strategy with Africa to enable this solidarity and update this solidarity and the promises to the African continent. Roll out an agenda in terms of education, health and climate up to the challenge of Africa. Three major directions. African continent has challenges even more important than ours. On education, we restarted with the President Macky Sall 4 years ago a shared partnership in the framework of the Global Partnership for Education. We shall go on with it, Europeanize it with a true project of develop much further the education of young girls everywhere in Africa, but also the training of teachers. On health, Europe was a pioneer, offering to the G20 this mechanism called ACTA, and having this solidarity through COVAX, but also the transfer of technology and the production towards Africa. This is what we will develop under the French presidency, having a real agenda, health agenda, rolling out much faster, much stronger structures of production of vaccines and of production of health systems. And about climate, we have to support in its energetic transition and climate transition the African continent. We cannot leave the African states without a solution. Their challenges are even bigger than ours. We started to manage this shared agenda, like the Great Green Wall, answering the challenges of biodiversity and climate in Africa, but there too, through financing of infrastructure and energy solution, we shall structure a strong initiative in the framework of the summit. Third major direction of this cooperation is security. France, as you know, is especially involved, but we wish to Europeanize. This is what we will do during our actions in the Sahel. Europeanize this partnership and have truly a partnership of security between Africa and Europe, which is the request of the heads of state and government to face the rise of terrorism on the continent. Fourth point, an agenda of the chosen mobility against the traffickers, the system of poverty that has been implemented, exploiting the most difficult situations, and organized migration, chosen migration, scientific, cultural, academic, within the African continent and between Africa and Europe. Those are the major directions that will structure the summit of refoundation on February 17 and 18. This is a contract of peace and prosperity that we wish to implement to build investments in the African economies and indeed build this shared future. This agenda was built with the Africans through meetings that I held here in Paris, that the President Charles Michel, had in the past days with several ministers. We built in May around the summit of Paris, during the Forum of Paris for Peace, and that you shall pursue in the weeks to come. Our immediate neighborhood are also the Balkans, Balkan states. We'll organize next June a conference on the Western Balkans. It's more than a neighborhood. The Balkans are at the heart of Europe. Look at the map. Look at our history. This region is today crossed by new tensions. The history is back. The tragedy also sometimes. And we have a responsibility today, a special one regarding the Balkans, the Western Balkans. We have to lead there a policy of re-engagement, but also of an investment to favor the integration, the economic integration of this region, favor the human sharing, the issue of minorities all through this region, and to fight against the interferences, against the manipulations that are performed by several powers, regional powers, wishing through the Balkans to destabilize Europe. I think that this work, which is a political and economic work regarding the Western Balkans, is a true agenda of sovereignty for Europe, because we will not be able to build the Europe of peace in the 50 years to come if we leave the Balkans, the Western Balkans, in the situation they are today. It's to clarify the perspective for Europe, reinvest in this region and its unity, and have really a shared ambition for the decades to come. Those are the three major directions of what is a more sovereign Europe, on which, as you see, the next semester will give way to very important meeting times that will finalize an ambition that we're pushing for several years, but that will also highlight practical answers for our co-citizens, a better control, a better mastery. Second major direction of this French presidency of the European Union, that was drawn little by little for our country, for our continent in the past month, and during this pandemic that we all experienced, is to build a new model, European model of growth. We have to define together what would be the Europe of 2030. This French presidency should be the occasion and the opportunity to imagine a new European model that will be a model of production, but also of solidarity and regulation. Indeed, our Europe must be a Europe where we can produce, create wealth at the cutting edge of innovation, defend our social model. We don't have the same choices, social choices, as Asia or America, and we have to be a Europe at the heart of the climate agenda, matching our values. From this point of view, and to build this strategy, 10-year strategy, we'll organize on March 10 and 11 in France an exceptional summit of the 27 heads of state and government around this main issue, define a new European growth and investment model. We'll give more details about that, but it rests around 4 pillars. I will just give you a few pictures about that. First pillar is the capacity to produce, to have an economic answer matching an outgoing of the crisis with one priority: turn Europe into a creation, innovation, economic Europe. We have to have one obsession: create jobs and fight against unemployment and mass unemployment. This agenda is mandatory to get out from the crisis. We will have to live the social and economic outcome of this crisis. For this, we have to build what we started to prepare, but the summit in March will enable to finalize the work and the consistency, the building of industrial processes, hydrogen, batteries, space, semiconductors, cloud, defense, health, culture, cultural and creative industries. In all those areas, high technical intensity, creation of value or of jobs that will structure the world of 2030, structure the creation of jobs, creation of added value, or capacity to have an influence on the world to come. We have to guarantee the positioning of Europe, our capacity to have, obviously, champions, capacity to create the maximum of jobs on our ground, and the maximum of defining the standards of tomorrow, and have our independence. For this, the action at the level of one state is not the good scale, not the good framework. You heard me saying that time and again, but when you have to lead the competition compared to the Chinese and the United States of America, when we were lagging behind, which is the case of some of those many important issues, cloud semiconductors, or the Europe de facto has dependencies. And if we want to catch up and take a lead, we have to think as Europeans. Think as Europeans, our investment as competence, industrial installation, either to reindustrialize or to build new industries and build true technological sovereignty in Europe. And since until March we will finalize, and the European Commission has a role to play, an European investment plan and industrial alliances, new alliances around those main targets that I expressed. This model of investment and growth supposes also rules, budgetary rules and financial rules that will be adapted, enabling to give a priority to the necessary investments to support the transition, especially climate and digital. For this, we will need to start to build a budgetary and financial framework that will be credible, simplified, accountable, that will be able to contribute to a stronger and more sustainable Europe, and more just, more fair Europe. And during this summit, March 10 and 11, we'll have a session of strategic thinking for the 27 member states for these topics. What does it mean? During the pandemic, we put under brackets the implementation of our budgetary rules. We'll have to get back to budgetary rules that are the ones that enable the convergence between our economies, especially those who share a shared currency. But we cannot do as if nothing had happened. And to succeed the development of those alliances, those industrial processes and innovation, we have to take into account the need of new investments. The new investments, we have to integrate them in our budgets, and we need a strategic discussion that stems from that. Say, facing this challenge, climate transition, digital, health, strategic, cultural, how our Europe should indeed take the right investments at the right level and rethink our framework, budget framework from that point of view. We shall not succeed in this transition. We will not do it at the scale of the continent if we get back to budgets that were created at the beginning of the 90s. At the same time, we will have also to restart about the financial framework, because if the Central European Bank has a strategy that was adapted to the crisis, we have to finalize a banking Europe and also a Europe of the capital markets facing all those investments. We have to raise money, private equity, and reorient that towards our priorities. This means we have to go farther in integration of a Europe, of a real capital market, a real financial market in Europe. This is within this agenda an element of consistency, because we shall succeed in this transformation only if we have to readapt, we know how to readapt our financial and budgetary rules. Second pillar of this new model of growth is to reconcile economic development and climate. Europe has an opportunity to become the champion in this matter, because it's a leverage of job and value creation for today and for tomorrow. Becoming the first continent in the world to have carbon neutrality framework, we set an ambitious framework. December last year, the 27th, were the first to commit themselves around this target. Reach this target doesn't mean to produce less or consume less, but to innovate, transform our policy, implement the right regulations and the right investments, to really use less energy, to electrify, to save energy, to produce more electricity that is as decarbonated as possible. We have to invent solutions of decarbonation of our economy, compatible, consistent with this degrowth agenda. We presented a certain amount of rules translating our ambition of carbon neutrality and reduction of 55% of our gas releases until 2030. The half year of French presidency has to bring forward those laws, not waste a second because it's an emergency, have the right level of investment innovation to reconcile climate ambition and economic development, have the right level of support of industries and households to have this balance between climate ambition and social fairness, social justice, and maintain our climate ambition. Under the French presidency, one of our main targets will be the implementation of the mechanism of adjustment, carbon adjustment at the borders. This carbon tax at the borders of Europe, enabling to lead this transition for all of our industries, preserving our competitiveness. What does it mean? Correct, amend the fact that we all ask efforts, investments, support them, decarbonize our industry, but that should go on importing goods coming from regions that do not make the same effort. We shall offset this difference at the borders. If not, our industries will say, well, look, you're creating a competitivity bias, and we shall suppress our industry and not modernize it. Reconcile competitivity, ambition, and climate change is implement this key system, and that we wish to finalize under the French presidency. We wish to move forward about the consistency of our trade policy and climate policy and diversity. French presidency will be a key time to push what we call the mirror clauses and have demands, environment and social demands in our trade agreements. It's a question of equity. The economic players, European economic players, cannot be the victims for their efforts for the sake of the globe. It's consistency of our trade agenda and climate agenda. We'll do everything what is possible. It's not going to be only under the French presidency. So within the reformation of the World Trade Organization, this agendas would be integrated. From this point, we shall move forward on the negotiations on the implementation of a European tool to fight against deforestation, imported deforestation, forbidding the importation into the European Union of soya, beef, palm oil, cacao, coffee, where they contribute to deforestation. Indeed, we have to resynchronize our agenda of a struggle against climate change and preservation of biodiversity. Both are linked. We showed at the beginning of the year by organizing here the One Planet Summit for Diversity that restarted this agenda for 2021, and France, the first, delivered an agenda against deforestation, imported deforestation, very consistent with our policy, climate policy, and our agricultural policy. When we are struggling for a protein plan, we are fighting against important deforestation by proteins imported from areas producing those proteins, vegetable proteins, thanks to deforestation. You see the consistency and the system mindset. We have to bring this at the European level to be collectively efficient and defend at European level the excellency of our agricultural model, which is of high quality. We wish to go on supporting in its transformation and there too in the preservation of the biodiversity. Third pillar of this new model of growth is turn Europe into a digital power. Digital is transforming all our production sectors at the heart of the global innovation and create jobs, growth, also defend our values. It's create a Europe of the digital. And to finalize it, first, It's to succeed in going on, emerging stronger players, champions of the digital, supporting innovation and growth of the emerging players in that field. France is leading for over 4 years a strategy in this matter, showing its efficiency through the outcome that we have on the continental Europe in terms of funds, startup creations, and raising the highest tickets. We wish to Europeanize this strategy and successfully have European funds of financing of our startups and the most innovative players of the digital, mobilizing our institutional players, the Fonds TB, that we wish, the TB funds that we wish to extend to European funds. Digital health, digital, generally speaking, enabling us to go faster, stronger in the development in our digital players, but to defend their sovereignty, avoid when they are in growing phase, would go and look for this money into the Anglo-Saxon and in Asia. 10 top capitalization, global capitalizations today, 8 are high-tech and none is European. That's the reality today of the global capitalism. So, what is source of hope is among those 8 companies of the tech that are among the 10 global capitalization, none existed 25 years ago. All hopes are open. We have to look at the rules of this competition, international competition, to make it. They're simple, if you want to get to them. Create a real integrated market of the digital. Simplify our rules, suppress the barriers between the 27. Work on this single digital market. Have the talents and go on in our capacity as Europeans to build an attractiveness agenda. We started it as Franco-French. Now we have to have it at the European level. 3, accelerate the financing. This is what I was talking about. And it's the link with a union. That's the link with the markets, financial markets, capital markets, equity markets, towards the risk, development, innovation of those champions. It's an essential element to build the new model of economic growth. Second direction, not to be submitted to the law of other powers by defining by ourselves the digital rules. I said it a few weeks ago at the Peace Forum in Paris. We successfully did, as Europeans, to have a European laws for the protection of individual data. It's a success on the European continent. We improved the protection of our citizens and their data, but we turned this into an international standard. The major groups got this standard and integrated this standard. So when we know how to organize ourselves, recreate global standards. We have to go on with this work. We obtained an international agreement on the tax of the multinationals, especially people working in the digital field. The agenda under the French presidency will enable to implement this agreement that has been finalized in the G20 at the European level. Until spring, we will have spent in the right councils called ECOFIN, the regulations enabling to put in these 2 pillars and to finalize this work for a true tax for multinationals. Then 2 pioneering texts that will be discussed with the European Parliament, on which we shall focus the French presidency. First is the Act for the Digital Market, DMA, avoiding the multinational of the digital will become monopolies and kill the spirit of the development. It's an action of economic regulation of the sector. Second is the Act for Services, Digital Service, called DSA, establishing a regime of responsibility of the major platforms, the products they're selling and the contents they are offering. This is an unheard of regulation, European regulation, to struggle against online hatred and make the major platforms accountable for what they have on their platforms. We are pioneers as Europeans in this matter. Every day we have to talk about anti-Semitism, racism, hatred speech, online harassment. There's no international regulation on those issues, so to speak, today. This text will be founding a foundation enabling to put a regulation of the contents and an accountability of the platforms. Those 2 texts, DMA, DSA, are top priorities on this digital pillar of the French presidency. Finally, it's the fourth pillar of this European growth model that we wish to put at the core, at the heart of this presidency. What should make a difference between the European model from the others is our collective capacity to offer to workers jobs of quality and best paid. As the Blanchard-Tirole report and all of the economists who wrote in this report, a report on the new growth model that we wish to defend, as they stated perfectly, is to create the right jobs, the good jobs. Europe always built on those two pillars: competitiveness, capacity to produce and innovate, but also the capacity to have collective preferences and social balances, and think the balance of our society, the fairness of our society, create good jobs, jobs better and better paid, train the employees, the workers. If Europe, our Europe, doesn't protect better the weakest, if the social dumping goes on, there will be a regulation-less market where the popular classes will not feel themselves at home. When part of our peoples regard that they are the loser of a system, they will reject it in a legitimate way. We obtained the past years important outcomes that we thought unreachable a few years on the detached, seconded work, increase of the controls. I was yesterday on one of the major processes of public works we have in the region of Allier. I could see the implementation of the controls that we could state through this European reform that we initiated. But this presidency should be the occasion to go further. And this is why I wanted to associate social partners to the preparation of this presidency. And we did it several months ago when Portugal was at the helm. We went on several topics about the minimum salaries of the European Union, defining not only a minimum European wage, but that will have a minimum wage, decent minimum wage.
So, of ministers in charge enabled us to make some headway, and we can complete that headway by really setting up a system that'd be a lot more efficient and arriving at a decent minimal wage in all European countries. We also want to see gender equality with a directive on wage transparency. And so there should be less discrepancy between their wages. And then we will also finalize EU proposals on quotas within boards of directors. This proposal has been on the table for quite a few years. I think we can complete that proposal during the next 6 years. We also want to move further the duty of care within EU. So this is the second pillar that accounts for the European growth model. This shows our capability as a collectivity to reinvent what made us, to be able to produce, innovate, to build that model as well as social justice within Europe. There'll be many other things to support, such as public health, agriculture, banning pesticides, and helping many regions having a responsible collectivism, capitalism. Anyway, this is a red line that we're highlighting. We want this presidency to be useful. We want Europe to be a full power and to take its fate into its hands and to be original. The third thing I would like to state, and that will be at the very heart of my presidency, is a human Europe, a human-sized Europe, a human-scale Europe, if you like. And this makes us special. Europe is small. But we managed to create democracy, Renaissance, humanism, enlightenment, human rights, and always we had that deep vocation inside to bring forward Europe in a certain way, because we had a certain idea of Europe. So I've showed you our agenda, our priorities, but going beyond that, I want the French presidency to be a moment of European humanism. We want to come together to set up a human Europe, and several initiatives will be taken. In May, we will host the conference on the future of Europe. I wanted to make that proposal in the spring of 2018. There's a lot of work that went into this, and I would like to thank all of the teams, all of the NGOs, all the people that committed themselves, the youth in particular, that really invested themselves, engaged into this work. And this will bring conclusions in May when we discuss with other European institutions, governments, and civil society. This will be a major milestone because a lot of people worked for this, and also because it is the very basis for our overhaul effort. We want to rebuild a founding elan, where we're going to rethink the future of Europe. We want it to be more efficient. We want it to be closer to our citizens. This is crucial for Europe to be more dynamic. We want to have a simple, ambitious goals. We want to be more democratic. And we want a more simple Europe. We should not lose track of that. This momentum might even overhaul Europe until next summer. There's a new coalition in Germany that came to power, and they have the same ambitions. Tomorrow, I will meet for the first time the German Chancellor, Mr. Scholz. He will come to Paris tomorrow at noon, and we'll have the opportunity to discuss this. And this political potential for several member states to embrace those issues is quite crucial for the spring of next year. We want to have the right ambition to be up to the history that awaits us. Also, as we always did, we will support values, the very basis, the very raison d'être of the European Union. We know the rule of law discussion. We'll have to lead that discussion. We can have a new look at procedures, but I would like to say now that those are issues that are existential. They cannot be negotiated. They're at the very basis of our treaties. They're at the very heart of the Human Rights Convention that preceded the EU. They are the very constitutional laws that base our union. There should not be a divide between East and West. There should not be a divide between our countries. This means that there is an existential political fight for us to keep up those values. But we also want to keep up that legal basis in terms of new vehicles, not just sanctions, but support. There's a deep political thinking to be done because some nations are doubting the value of this. So this is our responsibility as Europeans. And this is why during the 6 months, we'll have to find new tools to help this democratic Europe to live. And we have to set up a European support fund for independent journalists and investigative journalists. We will keep up that fight to defend the rule of law, to defend our values, equality, fight against hatred and discrimination. We'll aim to extend that list of offenses to crimes, to hatred crimes, fight against racism and anti-Semitism, and we want to have a charter to fight against violence against women. Europe is also a history, a unique culture. We have to support it and to defend it and to convey it. This human Europe, this sense of belonging, which lies at the heart of our slogan, will only be sustained if we are sensitive to it. This is our very history. And so we have to gear our education to this. European history is not just the simple addition of 27 countries. There's a consistency, we cannot feel it, but we cannot display it fully yet. This is why, under the French presidency, we have to reinitiate a major work on European history. And that has to take place on an independent basis. We live a political moment in Europe where revisionism is setting up in various countries. Historical revisionism is used by powers that want to use our history and to give a false look to what transpired. We have to build an academic framework where historians throughout Europe can work on an independent basis, working with science, working with controversies, but working independently. So next June in France, we want to initiate this work. It will be prepared, it will be difficult, but it will be on a scientific basis, and an independent committee will set it up over the next few months. We have to look at our historiography of Europe, and the world history of Europe. This is indispensable, and we have to think in terms of how we can convey that work in every country. So the European spirit is not just a flame that has to be reignited every day, but it has to be, we have to think of our education in schools and museums. So next June, there will be a huge meeting of European universities. During my Sorbonne speech, I proposed that we set up European universities. Our universities were very efficient because 40 European universities currently exist. This is one of the achievements that has helped transform that Sorbonne speech into reality. And maybe more universities have been set up, so we will support them to keep up that agenda and to emphasize the role of universities. I also want a European Academy to bring together all kinds of experts from our 27 countries to analyze our relationship with freedom and to propose cultural actions and projects. And in order for everyone to access those works that make us vibrate as Europeans, we'll take strong cultural initiatives during this presidency. Already, France has a culture in France and overseas, and in our representations, our cultural centers in Europe and elsewhere. This has to walk in parallel with the French presidency. For instance, in May, we will celebrate our 30 years of a major European project. We will launch several initiatives with our partners on this by deploying microfolies. And so in all European countries and cities that want to come on board this initiative, we will take up various projects to emphasize access to museums, artworks, theaters, and so on, through virtual achievements. And so it will be possible for those remote areas where you don't have access to this to have a new access. Over the last few years, we developed this, and that was quite successful. We'll do the same in Europe with our partners in May. 2022 will be the European Year of Youth. At the Sorbonne, I mentioned a generalization of the Erasmus program to all young Europeans, because this is a unique way of doing this. We have broadened this to apprentices. We doubled the number of beneficiaries. I'd like to thank all of those who came on board this ambition and to enable apprentices all over Europe to enjoy the advantages of this new program. We want to go further. We want to have a 6-month civil service open to all young people of less than 25 for a university or apprenticeship exchange or an exchange between NGOs. This European civil service is a proposal that we're making, and we want to implement this in a practical way because it stems from our youth, and we want to undertake this during that 6 months. So you will understand that this more human Europe is the kind of Europe that, through all these initiatives, will enable us, through schools, universities, and thanks to culture, to defend our values and to make sure that this fight for Europe is not a narrow-minded, but a fight that keeps renovating. We want to keep on fighting for Europe. We forget that this is what made us. We believe that we could leave it by this wayside. This is just as existential a fight as the other fights. And so these are the three pillars we want to have to organize that 6 months. I had several meetings and I had several themes that I mentioned to you. Those are the main pillars. Every week there will be minister meetings, there will be formal and informal meetings, and this agenda will be implemented.